Welcome to Driving Alpha, where we feature our friends, the outperforming investors who demonstrate their path to driving alpha or outsized investment returns. We're Alpha Partners, where we partner with 1,000 early-stage venture firms as their opportunity capital to invest in their best companies. Driving Alpha is supported by Affinity, provider of the CRM for the private capital relationship economy. Affinity knows who has the best relationship with the right startup. Affinity knows. Learn more at affinity.co/driving alpha.
Welcome to Driving Alpha, the podcast where we dive deep into venture capital, entrepreneurship, and the forces shaping the future of technology investing. I'm your host, Sam Silvershein, and today we're tackling one of the most critical sectors in tech, cybersecurity. Joining us is someone who saw the future before the rest of the market did. Bob Ackerman founded AllegisCyber in 1996 with a vision to create an entrepreneur-centric early-stage venture firm. In 2012, he doubled down on cybersecurity, making AllegisCyber the first venture capital firm focused 100% on the essential sector. Bob has been called one of cyber's money men, and in 2015, he raised the world's first dedicated cyber fund, but he didn't stop there. In 2016, he co-founded DataTribe, a startup foundry outside of Washington, D.C. that partners with entrepreneurs to launch high-impact cybersecurity companies. Beyond his investments, Bob shares his expertise as a lecturer in new venture finance at UC Berkeley's MBA program and serves on the advisory board of Stanford's Graduate School of Business. With cybersecurity threats escalating globally, the rise of AI attacks, and cyber startups facing both an opportunity and competition from global giants like CrowdStrike and Fortinet, Bob's perspective is more relevant than ever. So Bob, welcome to Driving Alpha.
Hey, Sam, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'd love to start at the beginning. Launching AllegisCyber before venture was really a mainstream word here, and then later pivoting to cybersecurity. So I'm curious, what was the insight or the turning point that originally led you to launch AllegisCyber? And then I'd love to kind of get into what made you pivot to be fully into cybersecurity as a sector.
If you go back to the origin story, my background's computer science academically, and I was a classic Silicon Valley entrepreneur, built 2 companies as a CEO and founder, and along the way had the pleasure of being backed by first time Sequoia, second time NEA, and that exposure to 2 great firms really gave me an insight into venture capital. And there was a little bit of nudging and a little bit of encouraging, particularly from the guys at Sequoia, that you should think about joining the ranks of venture capitalists at some point in time. So Gordy Russell had been on the board of one of the companies that I was working in, and he really kind of nudged me, and that really became the catalyst. And quite frankly, my second company, first company as a CEO, this was one of the leading Unix systems houses in the world, and we grew that business out of cash flow. And it gave me a different view of how to capitalize a company. I've been venture-backed. Now I was growing one out of cash flow, and I grew it out of cash flow working with select strategic corporate investors. And it sort of completed my education around how to build a company and the types of relationships that could contribute to building a company. And so when I made a decision after my next startup was backed by NEA, a company called InfoGear, where we created the original iPhones, I decided to to pull a number of pages out of my own playbook as an entrepreneur and created AllegisCyber. All of the capital in those early days was strategic because I had a particular insight that the right strategic partners sitting around the table would bring not only capital, but they would bring market insights, they'd bring access to markets. They would actually, if you engage them properly, would de-risk the proposition of building a startup company. And so the early days of AllegisCyber, 100% of the capital was strategic corporate capital, and we were very, very effective in leveraging those strategic relationships and building businesses. Along the way, early digital revolution became more and more interested as we transitioned into a more digital economy, more interested in the issues around security and privacy, which were beginning to bubble up and really weren't top of mind. So started making privacy-related investments in 2000, security-related investments in 2002. And the continuation of the Allegis origin story was we got to a realization that with the global economy digitizing, cyber threats were really the existential threat to that global digitized economy, and that securing that infrastructure was going to become a significant both challenge and opportunity. And I think from our perspective, the realization was that cyber was very complex. It moved very quickly. My conclusion was it's very difficult to do it part-time. You really needed to become a domain master. It'd be like doing life sciences part-time. I can't imagine doing that and doing it successfully. So we made a decision to go 100% all in on cyber, to become domain masters, to extract what I call an unfair competitive advantage as a result of that focus in terms of understanding not just what was going on in the marketplace, but the ability to be able to anticipate where the next generation threats were likely to evolve from. And not fully part of your question, but part of that observation was a realization that cyber, unlike any other area of technology, there is an offense. And in fact, the threats that we deal with in cybersecurity originate with the offense. And so if you want to understand where the defense needs to be, what the next generation of defense needs to look like, get as close to the offense as possible. The offense will tell you where the defense needs to be. You always go back to the old Wayne Gretzky quote about skating to where the puck is going to be. That was our playbook. And that, in fact, was the catalyst for, after setting up AllegisCyber to focus exclusively on early stage cyber, creating DataTribe, our foundry in Maryland, to start working with teams that came out of the offensive world, principally the National Security Agency and National Intelligence, that were creating the next generation of offensive threats and capabilities, and to leverage their expertise to build the countermeasures, the defensive response to that next generation of offensive threats, which is where DataTribe has built its reputation. And that turned out to be a really good call.
A lot to unpack. We're going to get into a lot of it, but I think you just ended with DataTribe. So I'm curious, I would love to just touch on how DataTribe and AllegisCyber have been working together, and how that, I guess it's the same platform, but how those two teams have collaborated on specific deals.
Yeah, so think of them as a continuum on the same platform. So the AllegisCyber focus is early stage, classically Series A and Series B. We have a team that's got tremendous domain expertise, as well as operating experience and venture experience, that focuses on those Series A, Series B investments. DataTribe is the seed platform. So this is where we're engaging with two guys and a dog in a garage who have never built a business, but are domain masters, are technically brilliant. And so the team at DataTribe really is optimized around engaging with first-time entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs at the earliest stages of their evolution, to bring together with their technical expertise, the capital, the business expertise, the access to market, the recruiting networks, the customer access that allows them to take their vision and see it realized. So DataTribe is seed stage, Allegis is early stage. They feed deal flow back and forth to each other. They collaborate on opportunities. There's a great example of one of the companies we started at DataTribe called Dragos in industrial security. And so the origin story there is we pulled 3 engineers out of the National Security Agency that have been the core of the NSA's offensive industrial cyber capability, and pulled them into DataTribe, provided their capital, began to work with them on what would the productization of their expertise look like from a defensive perspective, and launched that company at a point in time where there was no industrial cybersecurity market. The conventional wisdom was there wasn't a market, period. We had a different perspective based on our understanding of the offense, but that company was seed funded by DataTribe. But when they got to time for the Series A financing, Allegis led the Series A financing. So the two aspects of the platform are very complementary and work closely together.
So you identified the founders that eventually built Dragos. Can you touch on a little bit? Cybersecurity is a very difficult beast. You can pick different types of customers up and down the stack, SMBs, enterprises. So you always have to be skating to where the puck is going. And I'm curious, in your experience, what makes an ideal cybersecurity founder? Or are there certain things, themes, patterns, trends that you're looking for when you're identifying somebody at that maybe napkin phase, or not even at the napkin phase, but you have the idea for a business and maybe you've identified a person who could potentially be a founder for that idea?
I would say number one, domain mastery. Cyber is very complex. It moves very quickly. You can't pick it up along the way. For us, one of the criteria when we're working with a cybersecurity team is their domain expertise. Many times in Silicon Valley, you get a sector that's hot and it attracts all sorts of capital, all sorts of entrepreneurial talent, and they're basically learning on the job together. We don't think that works in cybersecurity. We think that because of the pace of cyber and the technical complexity, both the entrepreneur and, frankly, the venture capitalist needs to have deep domain expertise to be able to anticipate where those opportunities will be in the marketplace, but also to be able to navigate the minefield. When I was teaching at Berkeley, I would talk about the fact that building a startup is a bit like running through a minefield naked in the middle of the night. The chances on getting through unscathed are reasonably remote. You got two choices: hands and knees crawling slowly, hoping you don't get blown up, or go find a map. And so for a venture capitalist, an entrepreneur with deep domain expertise is akin to being a map. For that same entrepreneur, a venture capitalist that specializes in cybersecurity is akin to finding a map. It allows us to go faster with the knowledge of what we're likely to encounter, how to mitigate the challenges, understanding the cadence of the market. Cyber probably has more in common with life sciences than any other sector that I can think about, where, the innovation comes from, virtually all of the innovation comes from young private companies. As those companies validate their innovation and achieve critical mass, they approach that fork in the road, which is, are we going to be a public company or are we going to get acquired? The vast majority of those companies are acquired. They're acquired by big tech in most cases, who then integrate them into their branded platforms, offering that capability to their customers. Big pharma works the same way. Get through your phase 2 clinical trial or your phase 3 clinical trial. Big pharma comes along, acquires the innovation, puts it through their branded distribution channels, and off you go to the market. So understanding how the market operates is essential to building companies, quite frankly, building profitable companies in cybersecurity. And again, I can't imagine anybody doing life sciences part-time. I think it's really hard, particularly early stage, to do cybersecurity part-time.
Yeah. So this wouldn't be a venture podcast if we don't talk about AI for a little bit here. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on how AI is transforming cybersecurity. And let's split it into potentially offensive tech and defensive tech, and then certain trends that you guys are tracking or are currently investing in.
Look, artificial intelligence and its little cousin machine learning are going to have a transformative impact on just about everything that we do. No two ways about it. But I will tell you, having been in this business for quite a few years, the early stages of a market's evolution is driven by hype and hope. We are in the hype and hope phase today, where massive amounts of capital are thrown at innovation almost indiscriminately, promoted primarily by the fear of missing out. It doesn't mean there isn't real innovation taking place. There's a lot of real innovation taking place. But is it proportionate to the capital that's being deployed and the valuations that that capital is commanding? To be seen. What you typically will find is that first wave of innovation is what I call reconnaissance in force. It's the land rush, trying to get out to the gold fields and stake a claim as fast as you possibly can. The second phase of that market's evolution is the applied application of what's been learned. And I think that's kind of a coming of age story for artificial intelligence. Again, it's not to dismiss large language models and the work that's being done today. That's all part of the journey. But where the journey really gets exciting and really significant value begins to be created is when we apply that knowledge to solving specific problems, where we're either to solve problems that couldn't be solved, or we're releasing value, or we're materially increasing gross margin as a part of applying the technology. So as it relates to cybersecurity, and you alluded to it, there are two aspects. There's the offensive and the defensive aspects. From a defensive aspect, cybersecurity really will have a transformative impact on the tools, techniques, and technologies that we use today, allowing analysts to do more, to do faster, to do better, materially boosting the productivity of what our analysts are doing, say, in a SOC today. Very, very significant. Be able to collect more data, make more sense of the data, more rational interrogation of the data, all boosting our cyber posture. The flip side of that is the application of artificial intelligence to the offense or to the attacker's mindset. And any area of technology is dual use. It'll be used offensively and it'll be used defensively. And what you find is that the hackers, the offense, are never shy about taking advantage of new technology innovations to exploit and give themselves an advantage in their nefarious activities. Artificial intelligence is another one of those. We'll see AI-driven attacks. I'll give you an example. There was a breach about 7 years ago, Office of Personnel Management, credited to the Chinese government, compromised 23.5 million HR records, including classified employee records, federal government employees. That attack was underway for about 9 months before it was discovered. Not uncommon, not unusual. I had a good friend of mine who was a senior at the National Security Agency that was talking about the implications of artificial intelligence and using the OPM breach as an example. He says, when you start applying artificial intelligence to a breach like that, it's not 9 months, it's not 9 weeks, it's not 9 days, it's 9 hours. You've been hit, the data is gone before you have absolutely any idea that you're under attack. And so the implications for artificial intelligence, including much more sophisticated attacks, much more rapid attacks, is very, very real. What that means is we're going to now be applying artificial intelligence to the defense, not just boosting the productivity of our analysts, but automating defense. How do we use artificial intelligence to identify vulnerabilities on our networks in an automated fashion, to be able to rank order a vulnerability being exploited, trying to get ahead of the offense? And so it's going to be the old spy versus spy. It's going to be weapons against weapons. And it's going to transform cybersecurity, make it a much more challenging and much more dynamic environment, at the same time as the consequences and the stakes of getting it wrong continue to go up.
So as AI makes cyber attacks more sophisticated, curious where you're seeing the biggest risks and then also the biggest opportunities for investment.
I think, number one, the pure application of artificial intelligence to boosting the productivity and the usefulness of the standard tools that we have today, back to boosting the productivity of analysts. Number one. Number two, a lot of people are talking about deep fakes today. We've been talking about deep fakes for 7 or 8 years. If you want to look at a really good example of what this could mean, there's a company called Reality Defender out of New York as one of the leaders in deep fakes, and the ability to detect whether it's faked data, whether it's video or whether it's audio, to be able to detect when things are being manipulated is a good example of the offensive application of artificial intelligence, but then the defensive countermeasure to be able to detect the offensive application of artificial intelligence. I mean, it's absolutely frightening what you can do with a 15 or 20 second sample, say, of my voice to create a doppelganger for Bob Ackerman's voice. And for about $1, I can do that. And I will challenge most people to be able to discern between, is it real or is it Bob Ackerman or is it Memorex? And that technology just gets more and more sophisticated. As it gets more sophisticated, the offense becomes more brazen in their application of the technology. The consequences of getting it wrong become much more significant. Looking at network security, an area today where we spend massive amounts of time and energy to kind of map a network and to characterize the network. And the idea being you can't secure what you can't see. And so number one is see the network, be able to understand the totality of your estate and how exposed you are. The techniques we use today give us maybe 50% coverage of those networks, and we just hope we've got the right 50%. Well, in an AI-driven offensive environment, that's not going to cut it. We need to get to 100% visibility of our network. And as we transition from IPv4 to IPv6, it gets even harder to visualize those networks. And so this is an area where artificial intelligence network mapping is going to evolve to the next generation so we can see 100% of our networks. We can use technology to identify the vulnerabilities. We can look at what is the probability based on observed behavior in the wild of those vulnerabilities being exploited, and beginning to automate the defense of these networks and of this infrastructure against offense. Because the human analysts, even with AI being applied to boost their productivity, will not be fast enough. It will be machine versus machine at the end of the day.
Just for our listeners, IVP4 and IVP6, can you just explain that?
So IPv4 is sort of the standard internet protocol that we use today. IPv6 is the next generation protocol. IPv6 has been kind of in the making for 20 years and is now at a point where it's being deployed. And it really is about, there are a number of security enhancements that go with it, but one of the real driving motivations was to expand the address space available to networks. And so with the explosion, for example, of IoT and envisioning a world where networks are not thousands of devices or hundreds of thousands of devices, but are literally billions and tens of billions of devices, you need to expand the internet addressing space to be able to incorporate those devices. So one of the things you get when you go from IPv4 to IPv6 is a much larger address space. Now, the problem with that much larger address space is when it comes to mapping it, developing, if you will, a mental picture of what does my network look like. Up until a couple of years ago, it was largely viewed that it was impossible to map an IPv6 network, even with supercomputers. Some of my friends in national intelligence would say it will take 100 years of a supercomputer to map an IPv6 network, which means an hour into the exercise, you've already lost. But again, problem, opportunity, solution. There was a young engineer at the National Security Agency, Dr. Austin Murdoch, who envisioned an entirely new approach to mapping networks, including IPv6 networks. It developed a concept called computational mapping, which is a mathematical approach to envisioning those networks, where they in fact can map an IPv4 and or an IPv6 network and do it in near real time. So you went from the it's impossible to we can do it in near real time, transformative from a network security perspective. With that capability, laying the foundation to be able to identify where the vulnerabilities in my network, where do I have malware in my networks, what is the probability of that malware being activated by an adversary based on what the adversaries are doing in the wild, so I can take a more prescriptive, preemptive approach to securing my networks, understanding that there's an inbound offensive attack. And Austin started a company called SixMap that really is building the commercialized application of that technology around computational mapping.
Really helpful. Thanks for that. Are there specific subsectors or tools that you're most excited about today from an investment perspective that you've been spending more time in and really drilling in deeper to find the right opportunity, right company?
One of the great things about cybersecurity, right? Good news and bad news. The bad news, if you have a digital footprint, which every system today and every person today has, there is cyber exposure associated with that. And the fact that as those systems become more complex, as they continue to evolve, the threats continue to expand and to evolve. I don't envision a time where we can say we are cyber secure. It's an ongoing journey, becoming increasingly complex, increasingly sophisticated, because quite frankly, the benefit for the adversary of getting it right is unbound, and the consequences for the defender of getting it wrong is unaffordable. And so, again, you have this very interesting dynamic between offense and defense, which is continually innovating. The half-life of innovation is materially shorter than it might be in other areas of technology. So from an investor's perspective, or whether it's a venture capitalist or the people that invest with us, it's one of those areas where there's a massive problem. The problem only gets bigger. It only gets more complex. It never stops. And the value associated with solving those problems of delivering security solutions only increases. So it's about as resilient to market cycles as you can possibly get. Pretty insulated. Now, when you talk about specific areas, you go through, again, cycles of innovation where what today is the cutting edge of a threat will be tackled. It will be addressed. Technology will be developed which addresses those vulnerabilities and largely closes those doors. And the adversary doesn't say, well, okay, you got me, I'm going home, it's all over. No, they evolve. They identify either new vulnerabilities or new ways to compromise your defenses. So again, back to that back and forth, good guys versus bad guys. The things that we do, and it comes particularly from looking at a market from an offensive perspective, is understanding where is the offense going. If offense is what's driving cyber innovation, where is the offense going? And the offense tends to lead defense by 4 to 6 years, which interestingly enough is about the gestation period for a cyber defense company. So our playbook, our history has validated is get as close to the offense as you can, learn where the offense is going, and then leverage that expertise to build the defensive countermeasures. So I gave you an example earlier of Dragos in industrial security. When we started Dragos doing that first round of financing, the Series A, even my friends and colleagues that I work with in the venture community that know cyber really, really well, the conventional response was, Bob, you do realize there is no industrial cyber market. And my reaction was, that's a historically accurate statement because the threat had not manifest itself. The threat was still in the incubation stage. But because we had visibility into that incubation, we could anticipate 4 to 6 years from now, these threats are going to escape nation-state containment. They're going to become more broadly distributed, and they're going to open up an entirely new vector in cybersecurity going after critical infrastructure, which is what, in fact, has happened today. And many people would consider Dragos to be the leader in industrial cybersecurity, dealing with critical infrastructure, industrial control systems. But, we've got the leader in the space because we started it when nobody thought the market actually existed. So we look for those types of opportunities, looking into the lens of offense. Other things that come to mind, we've talked a little bit about this network mapping. We've talked about the offensive application of artificial intelligence. I spent a lot of time thinking about weaponized data. What happens if we have a data-driven economy? What happens when the adversary starts manipulating the data that controls those systems, and we can no longer depend upon those systems? So how do you defend against weaponized data? How do you establish the provenance of data? Can I trust this data or can I not? Let's pick a hypothetical, a data feed of market trading data that is distributed by a highly reputable financial information company, and that data feed goes right into automated trading systems and that then trade on that data at the speed of light. How do I know I can trust the data? What is the provenance of the data? Who touched the data? Who changed the data? These are the next generation issues that we're all going to be thinking about. When we get to the world of IoT and the complexity that goes with IoT, and those IoT devices start talking to each other, how do we ensure that the conversations are legitimate conversations? We talk a lot about identity access in the digital landscape as a major issue. It's been a major issue for 20 years. It's going to be a major issue for the next 20 years. Deepfakes is part of the threat to that identity access. But if you can compromise someone's identity and pretend to be somebody you are not, your ability to wreak havoc within that digital substrate in and around identity access is very, very real. What happens when it's billions of devices that are talking to each other and acting on our behalf, whether they're agents or bots or AI? How do you know that what they're doing is legitimate, that there's a legitimate conversation, that the devices that are talking to each other have been validated? So every time we add complexity to this digital substrate, we escalate the cyber risk and exposure on a material level. And I see nothing that is likely to stop that trend from continuing to manifest in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think we would all agree on that. And one thing I do want to touch on is non-consensus bets, and how you guys have found that in Dragos, which is awesome. And you're able to make money. And that's where a lot of investors make the majority of their money.
Well, I mean, look, let's be honest, right? If the herd was right, the herd would be rich. The herd's not rich, right? And so if you're looking to outperform on alpha, you're looking for those non-conventional bets. And how do you identify those non-conventional bets? In our case, it's very, very deep domain expertise, be able to develop proprietary insights that hopefully leads to proprietary opportunities. That really is what DataTribe has been all about.
So, specific industries that you feel are unprepared for the next or current wave of cyber threats, what would you be identifying right now?
Let's start with how we segment the marketplace. So when I segment the demand side of cybersecurity, I segment it into thirds. So I'm going to say it's Fortune 200, Fortune 250, very sophisticated, large organizations, well-resourced because of their scale, highly targeted. That is a segment of the marketplace. The next tier down is what we will call middle market, not from a private equity perspective, but below the equivalent of hyperscalers and above the small mom and pop individual operations. They have cyber risk just like the guys at the top tier do. What they don't have is the resources and the access to technology. And the bottom are the very small organizations that nobody would think are targets because they're so small and inconsequential. But when you begin to aggregate them, they aggregate into very large target markets. And this is where things like artificial intelligence will be particularly frightening, their ability to aggregate those large disaggregated markets today. So the top third of that market, that Fortune 200, 250, they acquire their technology directly from technology vendors. The next two tiers are going to be acquiring cybersecurity solutions through solution providers at different scales, where they can basically aggregate a lot of those customers together, and in the process of aggregating the customers, be able to afford to deploy next generation defensive capabilities. So one way of looking at the market is the distribution channels through which they operate. With that comes levels of sophistication. And with those levels of sophistication, we get directly to your question about who's prepared and who's not prepared. So those larger organizations are more prepared, largely because more often than not, they are regulated or they are designated as critical infrastructure, basically where the cost and consequence of getting it wrong is simply unaffordable. So financial services, for example, phenomenally sophisticated. The electrical sector, critical infrastructure, not as sophisticated as the financial sector, but because they are critical and people understand the consequences of getting it wrong, they have made material investments working with companies like Dragos to secure that critical infrastructure. But those tend to be larger organizations. They're at scale. They've got regulatory oversight, and that regulatory oversight pushes them to embrace the technology and techniques they need to secure their infrastructure. Where you run into issues, let's pick one, water treatment facilities, which are critical infrastructure based on various numbers, 6,000 to 8,000 water infrastructure companies in the United States. Many of them, the vast majority of them, are very, very small. They may have an IT person. They may have an IT person, yet they are a target because they are critical infrastructure. How do they secure themselves? So when you look at critical infrastructure, when it's comprised of small operators, they are unprepared to defend against the eventuality of an adversary deciding to target them. Small businesses. Look, we've seen schools. Who would think that a school would be a target? But ransomware attacks get launched at schools or hospitals or medical offices. These are folks who You wouldn't think there is a lot of commercial value attached to an offensive compromise, but yet they are, because they can be held ransom. So what you have business models being developed specifically for a customer type to extract value from a successful cyber attack.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but Insight apparently had a breach this weekend that hit the news earlier today, which we're definitely double clicking on our cyber protections and the tools that we're using.
I think one of the metaphors I use for people is we spend a tremendous amount of time and energy securing our infrastructure, securing our networks, and we should, right? That is the path by which the adversary accesses our golden jewels. One of the things I would leave with you is that I always use the metaphor, what is the mouse after? The mouse is after the cheese, right? Now, where do I go with this? You could put mouse traps all over the house to try and catch the mouse, but the mouse is after the cheese. Maybe what we need to think about, particularly in data-centric environments where the data is the cheese, is maybe we need to take a data-centric approach to cybersecurity as opposed to an access or a network-centric approach to security. Lock down the cheese, lock down the data. In areas where the adversary is trying to compromise the data or manipulate the data or steal the data or misappropriate the data, I think that framework, that mindset works really, really well. When you get to critical infrastructure, now it's not so much about the data as it is about manipulating the data or manipulating the systems to either take them offline or to produce outcomes that are not constructive. There was a great example in the Middle East going back a number of years ago where the safety systems of critical infrastructure and petrochemical processing were basically deliberately compromised with the intention of blowing up the facility. And fortunately, the attacker made an error in that process. But that's a little bit different than trying to steal data, but it is still an attack. It's an attack that has geopolitical implications. Now, we're just going to see more of that. When you look at cyber, there's the criminal element of cyber, but there is the nation state element of cyber. And when you think about cyber, think about the entire spectrum of bad human behavior, and it's being digitized. So whether it's the criminals, whether it's the hacktivists, whether it's the nation states, are all basically updating their playbooks to digital playbooks. And we talk a lot today about nation-state conflict, which increasingly has a cyber component to it. On full display in Ukraine, but you see it in the competition between the U.S. and China. And reports of the Chinese compromising U.S. critical infrastructure, laying in wait for a moment in time where they need to activate those compromises to achieve chaos or whatever their nefarious goals and objectives are. So cyber is not now just the criminal element or the hacktivist or the 14-year-old hiding in his parents' basement, disgruntled or having fun. It is now a tool of nation-state power. And whether that is compromising infrastructure, whether it's the theft of intellectual property, this entire digitization, again, of the global economy is uncharted territory. And it's an area where the first movers are the offense, and the rest of us are playing catch up.
So I want to end this on a little bit of a lighter note, a little bit of an upbeat note, because you could definitely spiral into the depths of despair by thinking about the cyber landscape. So I'm going to end with this question, which is, what advice would you be giving to founders, or what advice are you giving to founders that are attempting to build the next great cybersecurity company?
If you're talking to us, and again, my belief is number one, you should be looking for specialists. You should be looking for people that are smart about cybersecurity as you are as an entrepreneur, that have complementary skills. You will have the technical domain expertise. You want to talk with investors that understand the value of what you're doing, understand the nature of the problem you're doing, but can help de-risk your execution. And that is in helping you, not just capital. Capital's a commodity. That's the easy part. It's the people that you will need to successfully take your vision to successful implementation in the marketplace. It's access to the customers where they can make those warm introductions to the early adopters who are likely to be your first customers. So it's being able to acknowledge what you know and what you don't know, and finding partners, investment partners in this particular case, who know what you don't know, who have been there, done that, who have traveled on the entrepreneurial journey, so they are simpatico with the challenges of both financial, technical, emotional, team building challenges that you're likely to encounter. So they can be a good partner for you, but they can also help de-risk your execution in the marketplace and improve your probability of success. So I think it comes down to, like any area, go to an investor that knows as much about the market as you do. That can be a good partner and help you de-risk your execution.
I'm sure you and I have a bunch of those in our network that can absolutely be helpful. Bob, really appreciate you hopping on the pod today. Really appreciate your time, your commentary, your wisdom. And thanks for joining Driving Alpha.
Hey, Sam, a real pleasure. Happy to pick up the conversation anytime.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Driving Alpha podcast, where we host top investors to demonstrate how they outperform the market. Click subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Driving Alpha is supported by Affinity, provider of the CRM for the private capital relationship economy. Affinity knows who has the best relationship with the right startup. Affinity knows. Learn more at affinity.co/driving alpha.